In this video, I'm going to show you how I drew this horse. This is my first time drawing with pastels, so I'm going to be talking about all of the challenges I faced as well as the positives.
Welcome! For those of you who are new, I am Jessica Matheny, the artist of Jessica Matheny Fine Art. On this channel, I offer time lapses of my drawings and paintings, as well as tutorials and tips. Let's get into the pastel drawing. So for this drawing, I am using Strathmore 9x12" pastel paper and Faber-Castell Pit Pastel pencils. To sharpen my pencils, I am using a Coombe hand sharpener, sandpaper, and I'm also hand sharpening with a blade, but I don't start doing that until the almost end of the drawing. With choosing to draw this horse on paper, I knew it wouldn't be like pastel mat, but I've also never done pastels before and wanted to try it on this paper and see how it goes. The paper has some good tooth to it, surprisingly, and seems to have better tooth than the Canson brand that I also have. I chose to pick a toned paper for this. Never used a toned paper before either. I decided to go with a mid-tone color that was slightly reddish orange, just based on the knowledge that the color of the horse I was planning on drawing was a palomino, which has various shades of yellows, browns, and reds. I believe I made a good choice in doing that by choosing the reddish orange paper because it gave it a nice color undertone that ended up helping me out in the end. So for this drawing, I started off in the corner and on the background because I didn't really know what I was doing. I've never worked with pastels before. I just know that they're a little harder to control and work than colored pencils in some ways, like just my first impressions. After going through this whole drawing process, I have a different take on it, of course, but I wanted to see and experiment different ways to try and blend my colored pencils, and I didn't want to start doing it on the horse because if I mess up, I want to be able to fix it and make it better instead of being stuck with something that I may not be able to rectify. So I started off blending with the tools I'm using. They are, I'm having a brain fart. They are silicone molding tools for clay work, but I got them specifically for these pastels to work with because I do know that you can use those or blending stumps to blend your colored pencils with, but I had no idea starting off what I was going to end up using. I had some sponges too that you usually would use for pan pastels. I just got the whole swing of it so that I had a whole range of tools to go from to pick and choose what I ended up wanting to work with. And for this drawing, I ended up liking the silicone tools the most. I started off with a really flat one to try and blend the background with, and it ended up not working as nicely as the pointed ones. So there's one that is rounded and comes to a single point, and then there is also one that has a beveled edge that comes to a point. And both of those two seem to blend the most because they come to a point. And that point helps blend the powder of the pastels into the paper better than it does with just a soft, flat surface. I tried using a sponge, and the sponge just seemed to suck up the pigment, and I was quite surprised that it sucked up as much as it did, and then it just was not spreading it out the way I had hoped it would. So I stopped using the sponge early on, except to maybe try and get a base layer in to blend off all the light parts of the paper in the little crevices, but I ended up just not really using it all throughout this whole process. I just stuck with the silicone molding tools to accomplish this whole drawing. So now I'm going in and trying to work in some of the colors for this horse on the side of the head here. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do for the hair. I kind of saved that till a little bit later just because I knew that that was going to have to go over the neck area. And that was one thing I was looking forward to with using these pastels, is that you can draw hairs over dark areas, whereas colored pencils, you can't really do that unless it's dark hair over light, because colored pencil isn't opaque enough. It's too transparent, so you'll see the undertones through the upper layer. You have to layer your work on from light to dark and slowly, and make precise strokes so that you can spare the area for white hairs. I'm getting the base colors in a lot like I would colored pencils, so I'm going in with my lightest colors first and just trying to get the good color balance in there and my values, and then I'm going in with the darker colors over the top to darken it to the correct values that it should be. And that seemed to be working really well for me, is trying to treat these pastels kind of like colored pencils and not just going all out and trying to rely on being able to overlap dark over light or light over dark, either or, whenever I decided to do it, like I've seen some people do in their videos. Before starting this project, I really didn't do much research on pastels. Like, I didn't even research which ones would probably be the hardest or softest kind. I just have used Faber-Castell colored pencils, and I just decided that the Pit Pastels for Faber-Castell were probably a good product because I liked their colored pencils a lot. So I decided to try them. And in doing research after this drawing is when I found out that they actually are one of the hardest leads to work with, and so they are less prone to breaking, which probably helped me out a lot in this. So I'm adding some colors to the face and then slowly darkening it, bringing in those shades to what they should be. I'm always using black for last. I do that with my colored pencil work. You don't ever want to use black first, because if you go in there and do that, then you're struggling with your values eventually. It's always better to just go slightly darker over time, and that way, I guess it kind of saves you looking at it and trying to evaluate it more, because if you know, alright, well this needs to be just a tad darker, and each time you go a little bit darker, then you're not ever over-correcting and having to correct those mistakes later. I did find that going in and doing the detail work for the eyes, like, I didn't start sharpening my pencils by hand until way later in this video, and I kind of think that might have helped me a little bit with getting details in the eye area if I had hand sharpened them. But regardless, I did use sandpaper, so I sharpened them down with the Coom hand sharpener, which is actually a really good sharpener. I'm so glad I got that for my colored pencil work. It ended up working out really great for me with these pastels. I just took off some of the wood on it. It's got a two-part sharpener, one where it takes down the pencil, and then the other one where it kind of refines the lead. So I used it in two parts until I felt like it was good, and then I just sanded the rest on sandpaper to try and get it down to the fine enough point that I could get some details in there. But had I started hand sharpening to begin with the eye, I probably could have gotten those details a little bit faster. It's not that big of a deal. Going in and doing the mane here, and working with the hair was a lot different than colored pencils, just because, you know, this is like a chalky medium. It's not quite like the colored pencils where it's oily or wax. So it really kind of blends and softens, which I do kind of like for hair. It's not supposed to be like the main focal point. If you're not trying to get a whole lot of detail in there, it's great for that. Whereas colored pencil, depending on what you do, you can kind of get too much detail than you wanted, or or too little detail, depending if you blend it too much, especially with odorless mineral spirits. But I ended up like going and reworking this mane again a little bit later, and I pretty much maxed out the layers that I could put on this paper, which wasn't too bad. I mean, it still took it. It's just that as it was taking it, I could tell it was at the max because it was just kind of blending it instead of adding a straight solid line, which I don't think it made a bad impact on this drawing at all. I think it actually worked out fine for me in the end. The other nice thing about these pastels is that they do have really vibrant colors from the get-go. When you're working with colored pencils, you have to slowly build up your layers because they're so translucent. And with these pastels, it's really nice that you can put them on there and the colors are really close to how they're going to be at the end result, which is nice, and it does save you time. I really like that the pastel set that I got has a lot of range of colors to use. I probably ended up using almost every single one of the yellow and brownish yellow and red orange colors that was in my set. They all had a good light fast rating, which I was happy about. The one downside is that only a few of them were I want to say a 2-star on the Faber-Castell light fast ratings that they give. So they give their ratings by the Blue Wool standard: 3-star, 2-star, and 1-stars. The 3 stars being 100 plus years of museum light, the 2 stars being 25 plus years of museum light, and the 1 stars being only 5 plus years. And some of the colors I used were only the 25 plus years, which, you know, I really wouldn't have wanted to use them because with my colored pencil work, I won't use anything that isn't a 3-star. I pull out all of my colored pencils that are 2 stars or less, and I refuse to use them. But that's also because with the colored pencils, with the Faber-Castell set, pretty much all of them are 3 stars, except maybe I think I pulled out 3 or 4 pencils that weren't 3 stars. But with the pastels, I was surprised to see that a lot of them actually are not all 3 stars. But I was okay with using the at least 25 plus year, but I will refuse to use the 1 stars with them. I'll just have to make sure that I get them in a good frame so that my work doesn't deteriorate with colors over time. I was sad to see though that with the set that I got, all of the Faber-Castell greens, all of the greens, I think there were 8 greens in the set, and they were all 1 stars, unusable, except one I believe was a 2-star or a 3-star, I can't remember. So if I want to use pastels in the long run, I'm going to have to get another set from another brand that has better light fast ratings on their greens, because the Faber-Castell set doesn't have any usable long-lasting colors. So another thing with this paper, I've gone in there and I have drawn in the hairs on the head of the horse. And I have drawn them over the kind of darker areas. I was quite surprised. I didn't expect to get such good results with this paper just because it's not pastel matte, which was what most people use and talk about it being the best for your pastels to work with. And so I just got my pastel pencils to a fine enough point. At this point, I still don't think I was sharpening them by hand and getting them to a really nice fine point, but I got them sharp enough, and I did get those hairs to come in actually very nicely on top of the dark areas of this horse, which surprised me. I was glad that it came in so well. Had a lot of fun going and working on the muzzle of this horse. I love working on horses. I feel like I don't get to do them as much as I would like to. I have a lot of other animals that I end up drawing or working on, and one of the things to try and keep me doing horses, which I love doing the most, is when I start a new medium, I always start with a horse because I love doing them so much and I've been drawing them my whole life. So I feel like I understand their anatomy the most, and I don't always need to look at reference photos to fill in certain details. I kind of know what they should look like or how the light should affect them. And so it just makes it easier for me going in and doing something new that it's on a subject that I have done many, many times. So doing the muzzle on this horse, I really enjoyed working with those pinks and putting the little blaze on this horse in there. I thought that was really fun. It was really, really nice with these pastels, being able to go in and rework areas and not having to be so careful on not putting too much of something, because with colored pencil you're kind of really limited on what you can take off, and especially if you're blending with odorless mineral spirits, that kind of permanently puts pigment into the paper, so then you can't go back to white. It will always show through. So it was nice working on this horse that I could go over it with dark, and then I could go back over it with some lights, and that those would show and lighten up instead of staying dark. Whereas with colored pencil, once you get it dark, you can't go back to light, especially if you're using blacks or some of those really dark browns. And on this neck here, I'm just going in and adding in some of those shadows and slowly darkening it, of course, adding in a lot of reds, and I'm using the reddish colored yellow also from my set, which I used that one a lot actually. You'd be surprised in doing this horse, you think it's like pretty yellow, but it's actually got a lot of red colors to it. Doing my layers, I just go in with the base colors first, or like the main color that it should be, and then I'm going over with other colors after that to add in the correct color saturation, and then I'm going through and blending it after. But with the darker areas, like, I want to make sure I get those blended in first before I add any other colors on top of that. the muzzle on this horse, I only used 3 pink colors, and I'm very happy that the Faber-Castell set, the pinks, the skin tones, are actually 3-star ratings for their colors. So I was able to use these without having to worry about the longevity of these colors going on. Now we get a close-up shot of me working on this nose, adding in those little wrinkly details. So I went in with my pinks first. I didn't care that it was a lighter color. I needed to get the color in there, regardless of how light it was. There was only those 3 skin color pigments that I could use that were I felt that they were the right colors to use based off of the reference photo that I was going from. And then I went in with some browns on top of that to darken it, and then ultimately black at the end to just lightly cover the areas that should be darker than the browns would make them. The undertone for this area of the nose was actually kind of a really pale yellow-brown, almost the same color as the paper, but just a little bit darker. So I went in and I got that first, and then I'm just adding the highlights of the nose over that with white. I'm almost done with this drawing, so now I'm going to go over what I would take away from this drawing. I'm going to cover some things that I wouldn't do again and things that I would do again. What I wouldn't do again, I wouldn't use a sponge to blend with because it just sucks up the pigment and wastes it. It did not give me the quality blend in my opinion, although I might have gotten a better results with the sponges and blending had I used pastel matte. Perhaps the paper I chose to work with had an influence in that aspect. I also wouldn't be harsh with sharpening. Not that I was super harsh, but I feel like I could have been a little more gentle, especially because it seems like the black pencil from this Faber-Castell set is softer than any of the other colors because it was the only one that broke multiple times while I was sharpening it. And what I would do again is I definitely will be doing more pastel drawings in the future. This drawing, if I had done it in colored pencil, I think it would have taken me double the time. This drawing took me 24 and a half hours to do, and it was so much faster to get my colors and values down than it is when I do my colored pencil drawings. I would use my silicone clay molding tools to blend with again. They blend the pastel fantastically and save me a lot of time with layering, and they are able to blend the tiniest of areas too, getting those little teeny tips in there. I would also use this paper again. I feel like this paper, the Strathmore pastel paper, has some really good tooth to it, and I was able to get, some good details out of this because the paper was able to grab the pastels pretty well. I was able to get at least like 4 to 5 layers in there in some areas, and it was still taking more pastel very well. I would definitely use my Faber-Castell Pit Pastels again. I like that they are harder pastel than some other brands. After working with colored pencils for a long time and being used to them, picking the hardest kind there is for the pastels saved me a great deal of frustration. They break less than some other brands because they're harder. So for painting pastels, these are a wonderful choice. I would hand sharpen my pastels again with a blade. I didn't start doing this until near the end of the drawing when I wanted to see if I could get the details in this paper, and it turns out I could. I like hand sharpening them the most. I was able to get them down to a nice point because they are a harder pastel. I could press a little harder on the paper to get a strong amount there without worrying that they would break or crumble. Even my colored pencils would have broken a bit with the amount of pressure I was actually able to use at some points with putting these pastels on the paper. So if you are interested in prints of this drawing, I have prints available from my website as well as other merchandise like mugs and pillows. You can find those on the prints section of my website. They are all through Fine Art America.
What are some of your tips with drawing with pastels? Let me know in the comments section. And be sure to follow me on Instagram and Facebook so that you can stay up to date on the happenings with my studio. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching. See you next time.